The air hangs thick and still in the opulent, sterile conference room. My own company's logo gleams subtly on a projected slide behind me, a silent testament to years of relentless, unforgiving work. Across the polished mahogany table sits my sister, her face a mask of strained composure, next to the remnants of her legal team. They are here to sign the papers. The papers that transfer ownership of everything she built, everything she thought was safe. To me.
To me.
The woman whose engagement ring her husband, my husband at the time, gave to her after I paid off his $400,000 debt. A single tear tracks a slow path down her cheek, catching the light. It is not a tear of sadness, not truly. It is a tear of defeat, of disbelief, of the world tilting on its axis, forcing her to land at my feet. This is not how she wrote the story. This is not how any of us wrote the story. But the ink is dry on the page I control now. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Life used to hum along, a quiet, predictable tune. Not perfect, never perfect, but stable. I had a decent job, the kind that paid the bills and a little extra. Enough for small comforts, shared dinners, the illusion of security. And I had David. Charming David, with his easy smile and his complicated finances. When we met, the complications felt like temporary hurdles, things we'd tackle together. Love, I told myself, meant partnership. Partnership meant sharing the burdens. His burden was significant. A business venture gone spectacularly wrong, buried under layers of debt he couldn't dig himself out of. $400,000. A number that felt abstract, terrifying. A black hole threatening to swallow us whole. We talked about it late into the night, the weight of it heavy in the air between us. His shame was palpable, a thick cloud I desperately wanted to dissipate. He promised this was rock bottom, that with this cleared, we could build something real, something solid, finally start our lives without this albatross. My savings weren't enough. Not even close. I liquidated everything I could, pulled from retirement, borrowed against what little equity I had. It still wasn't enough. I worked overtime, took on freelance projects, became a machine fueled by caffeine and the desperate hope of a fresh start. Every spare dollar went towards that number, chipping away at the mountain. It took years. Years of sacrificing trips, new clothes, even simple nights out. Years of eating rice and beans, driving a car with bald tires, living a life stripped down to the bare essentials while that number slowly, agonizingly, shrank. And then, finally, the day came. The day the final payment cleared. I remember the feeling of clicking submit on the bank transfer. Not elation, not joy. Just an overwhelming, bone-deep exhaustion. A quiet sense of accomplishment. I had done it. We had done it. The debt was gone. Vanished. Like a bad dream dissipating with the morning light. I told David, the relief washing over his face a mirror of my own internal quietude. He held me tight, whispering thank yous into my hair, promising a future free from worry, a life we could finally build together, properly. He talked about how much this meant, how he owed me everything, how this was our real beginning. A few weeks later, his business, finally free of the crushing debt, started to show signs of life. Small contracts, steady income. The air in our apartment felt lighter. We even planned a small trip, a celebration of our freedom. This was it, I thought. The reward for years of sacrifice. The foundation for our future, cemented with my sweat and depleted savings. My sister, Clara, was a constant presence in my life. Closer than most sisters. We shared secrets, supported each other through heartbreaks and triumphs. She knew about David's debt, about my struggle to clear it. She offered words of encouragement, shared my quiet relief when it was finally gone. She was family. She was safe. Which is why the sight of it, glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights of the family reunion hall, felt like a physical blow. She raised her hand to push a strand of hair from her face, and there it was. On her left ring finger. My engagement ring. The one David had given me years ago. The one I had mentally packed away with our shared dreams after the debt was paid, waiting for the right time for him to propose again, properly, now that we weren't drowning. It wasn't just similar. It was it. The unique setting, the specific cut of the stone, the tiny, almost imperceptible scratch on the band from where I'd once knocked it against a ceramic mug. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The music and chatter of the party faded into a dull roar. All I could see was the ring, on her hand. She caught my eye, smiled a wide, innocent smile, and casually lowered her hand. I felt the blood drain from my face. A cold, metallic taste filled my mouth. It couldn't be. There had to be a mistake. Maybe David had bought her a similar ring? Maybe my eyes were playing tricks? But deep down, a primal part of me knew. The air around her crackled with something ugly, something I couldn't name yet, but felt like poison. I managed to choke out a greeting, my voice thin and reedy. She chatted normally, asking about work, about our trip plans. All the while, that ring sat there, a mocking symbol on her finger. I couldn't breathe. I made my excuses quickly, muttering something about needing fresh air. I stumbled outside, the cool night air doing little to quell the fire raging inside me. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling, and texted David. "Where is my ring?" The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. An eternity passed. Then the message. "We need to talk." The next few days were a blur of confrontation, disbelief, and shattering reality. David sat across from me, his usual charm replaced by a shifty, nervous energy. He admitted it. Not immediately, not easily. He danced around it, tried to deflect, until I finally cornered him, showing him the blurry picture I'd secretly taken of Clara's hand. He confessed. He'd sold my ring. Months ago, when he was still struggling with the last bit of the debt. He needed cash, fast, and the ring was the easiest thing. He justified it, twisted it into a necessary sacrifice, something he'd intended to replace. But then Clara had needed money. For her business. A smaller amount than his debt, but still significant to her. He'd given her the money from selling the ring. And somewhere along the line in his twisted logic, giving her the money from the ring meant giving her the ring itself. Or the idea of it. He'd had a replica made. A cheap, convincing fake that looked identical to mine. And he'd given it to her. As a gift. As a symbol of what? Support? Affection? A twisted token of alliance. He stammered through the explanation, his eyes avoiding mine. He said it wasn't what it looked like. That he and Clara were just friends, close friends. That he was helping her out. That the ring was just a symbol, a stand-in, a temporary arrangement. But he didn't deny giving my engagement ring, or its value, to my sister. He didn't deny that she was now wearing a copy of the ring he promised me a future with. The betrayal was a multi-layered assault. David's lie, his deception, the casual way he disposed of something so symbolic to me. And Clara, my sister, who knew the history of the ring, who knew I'd sacrificed everything to clear his debt, who saw that debt payment as the path to our future, and she accepted it. She wore it. She smiled at me with it on her finger. I confronted her. Over the phone initially, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and hurt. She sounded defensive, then dismissive. She claimed David had helped her, that the ring was a gift, a gesture of his support for her independence, her business. She made it sound like I was being overly emotional, possessive, like it was just a ring. Just a ring? It wasn't just a ring. It was a symbol of a promise, a future, a partnership I had paid dearly for. And they had turned it into a currency of their own making, exchanging it for something that felt sickeningly like complicity. An unspoken bond formed in the shadows of my sacrifice. The early days of this new reality were a fog of pain and confusion. The air in our apartment felt toxic. David and I couldn't be in the same room without the unspoken accusations hanging heavy between us. He kept trying to rationalize, to minimize, to turn it back on me. Why was I making such a big deal about a piece of jewelry? Couldn't I see he was in a difficult position? I couldn't. All I saw was the casual discarding of my trust, my sacrifice, my future. All I saw was my sister, complicit, wearing a replica of my dreams. I started divorce proceedings. It was a quiet, clinical process initiated by me. He didn't fight it. He didn't have the energy, or maybe the will. The man I thought I knew had vanished, replaced by a stranger who seemed incapable of understanding the depth of the wound he'd inflicted. Clara stayed out of it, publicly, but I knew they were in contact. I could feel it, an invisible thread connecting them, excluding me. My friends tried to offer support, but it was hard to explain. How could I convey the specific sting of the woman I considered my closest friend, my sister, wearing the symbol of the future stolen from me by the man I loved, a future I had literally paid for? It sounded like a melodramatic plot from a bad movie, but it was my life. Financially, I was wiped out again. Paying off David's debt had drained me dry. The divorce settlements were minimal. There wasn't much left to divide. I was starting over, not just emotionally, but financially from scratch. The years of saving, the sacrifice, it felt like it had all been for nothing. Less than nothing. It had paved the way for their quiet little conspiracy. My career, which had been a steady presence, became my lifeline. I poured all my energy into it. Work became my refuge, my distraction, my only source of control in a world that felt entirely out of control. I worked longer hours, took on more responsibility, pushed myself harder than I ever had before. I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. I had bills to pay, a life to rebuild, and a growing, cold determination hardening in my chest. Meanwhile, Clara's business seemed to be thriving. I heard snippets through mutual acquaintances. New office space, hiring staff, landing significant contracts. David was apparently involved, informally advising her, using the skills he'd honed and failed with in his own venture. They were building something together, seemingly effortless, while I was clawing my way back from the bottom. The universe, it seemed, was intent on rubbing salt in the wound. Every success of theirs felt like a direct insult, a validation of their actions, a sign that maybe, just maybe, I was the fool. The one who sacrificed, who paid the price, only to be left with nothing while they prospered on the foundation I had laid. I saw Clara occasionally at family events. We were civil, distant. The warmth was gone, replaced by a thin layer of politeness that barely masked the chasm between us. She never mentioned the ring. I never mentioned the ring. It was the elephant in the room, the silent accusation that hung heavy in the air whenever we were near each other. I watched her, observed her rising success, her growing confidence, and the cold determination in my chest solidified into something sharp and focused. The turning point wasn't a single dramatic event. It was a slow burn, a gradual shift in my mindset. Initially, I was consumed by hurt and anger. I wanted apologies, explanations, restitution. I wanted the ring back, not just for its material value, but for what it represented, for the injustice of it all. But seeking that felt like begging for scraps from people who had already shown me they had no empathy, no remorse. Their lack of understanding, their continued easy existence, fueled a deeper, colder resolve. I realized I couldn't force them to feel guilty. I couldn't make them understand the pain they had caused. Their world had continued, uninterrupted, while mine had shattered. So I stopped looking for external validation or justice. I started looking inward and outward at the world as it was, not as I wished it were. I focused on my business, not just as a job, but as a weapon.
A tool.
A means to build a fortress around myself, a life they could not touch, could not take from me. I shifted my focus. I wasn't just working to survive anymore. I was working to thrive, to dominate, to build something so undeniably powerful that it would render their petty betrayal irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. My goal wasn't to get the ring back from them. My goal was to build a world where they would have to bring it to me. My company was in the same industry as Clara's, operating in slightly different niches, but with significant overlap. I started studying her business, not out of curiosity, but with strategic intent. I learned their strengths, their weaknesses, their market position. I saw opportunities where they were vulnerable. I started positioning my company not just as a competitor, but as a potential consolidator. The years that followed were relentless. I worked constantly. My social life dwindled to almost nothing. Every decision, every project, every expansion was viewed through a single lens. How does this increase my company's power and market share? How does this position us for acquisition? I built a team, a loyal, brilliant group of people who believed in the company's mission, unaware of the deeply personal fuel driving my ambition. We innovated, we expanded, we became lean and aggressive. We started winning bigger contracts, attracting more investment, our name becoming synonymous with reliability and success. Meanwhile, Clara's company seemed to plateau. The initial rapid growth slowed. I heard whispers of internal issues, missed deadlines, difficulty securing funding for further expansion. David was still involved, but perhaps his informal advising wasn't as effective as she'd hoped, or maybe the initial capital infusion from the ring sale, or the money from selling the ring, had only papered over deeper structural problems. The market started shifting. Larger players began looking to consolidate. And my company, lean, agile, and growing rapidly, was perfectly positioned. We made a few strategic acquisitions ourselves, solidifying our position as a major force in the industry. Our next target became clear, almost inevitable. Clara's company. The decision wasn't emotional, not outwardly. It was a calculated business move. Acquiring her company would give us a significant market share boost, eliminate a competitor, and integrate valuable assets. On paper, it made perfect sense. But underneath the spreadsheets and valuations, a deep, quiet storm was brewing within me. This wasn't just business. This was completion. This was the final act. The world I had built was now colliding head-on with the world they had built, and mine was undeniably stronger. I instructed my team to initiate preliminary discussions. It had to be done professionally, through intermediaries. I couldn't show my hand, couldn't reveal the personal vendetta that fueled this move. To the outside world, it was just business. Good business. The initial reaction from Clara's side was surprise, then defensiveness. They tried to resist, to find other options. But their position was weaker than mine. My company was robust, well-funded, and our offer was fair, albeit non-negotiable. The negotiation process was protracted and tense. I stayed in the background initially, letting my M&A team handle the specifics. But I was involved in every major decision. I knew their business inside and out, their pain points, their vulnerabilities. My knowledge wasn't just from market research. It was from years of watching Clara, of seeing David's influence, of understanding their intertwined world. There were moments of doubt, moments where the scale of what I was doing felt overwhelming. Was this worth it? Was I letting bitterness consume me? But then I'd remember the ring on her hand, the easy smiles, the years of sacrifice. The cold pit in my stomach would harden, and I would push forward. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about reclaiming my power, my narrative, my worth. As the negotiations reached their critical phase, Clara became more directly involved. I had to interact with her in carefully orchestrated meetings, always with lawyers and advisors present. Our interactions were cold, purely professional. We discussed assets, liabilities, employee transitions. We talked about the future of her business, which was now becoming my business. She never met my gaze directly. She seemed smaller, less confident than I remembered. The fire that had fueled her initial success seemed to have banked. Or maybe it was simply overshadowed by the sheer force of the machine I had built, rolling inevitably towards her. The final meeting, the one where the deal would be signed, was scheduled. It was to be held in a neutral location, a conference room downtown. But at the last minute, I changed the location. I moved it to my office. Specifically, to the large, imposing conference room at the head of the hallway, the one with the view of the city stretching out below. The room where I made my most important decisions. Where I held court. This was my territory now. She was coming to me. They arrived, Clara, her lead lawyer, a financial advisor. I greeted them with a polite nod, motioned them to their seats. The air was thick with unspoken tension. My team was present, calm and professional. We went through the final points, the lawyers droning on with legal jargon. I watched Clara. Her hands were clasped tightly on the table, her knuckles white. She looked tired, defeated. The mask of composure she wore earlier today in my imagination was now cracking. Finally, my lead lawyer summarized the terms, confirmed the final purchase price, and indicated where the signing would take place. He pushed the large binder of documents across the table towards Clara and her lawyer. There was a long silence. The only sounds were the hum of the ventilation and the distant city traffic. Clara looked at the binder, then at her lawyer, then slowly, reluctantly, her eyes lifted to meet mine. For the first time in years, I saw the raw emotion on her face. Not anger, not defiance. Something closer to sorrow, and perhaps finally understanding. The years melted away, and for a fleeting second, I saw the sister I used to know, before everything went wrong. Before David. Before the debt. Before the ring. But that moment passed. The steel in my gaze didn't waver. This wasn't about sentimentality. This was about consequence. Her lawyer nudged the binder towards her. She hesitated for another beat, then reached out a trembling hand. She picked up the pen. And as her hand hovered over the signature line, she paused. She looked at me again, a question in her eyes. A silent plea? An acknowledgement. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached her other hand into her purse. My heart, which I thought was encased in ice, gave a strange, lurching beat. Her hand emerged, holding a small, velvet box. It wasn't the original box the ring came in, but it was similar. Dark blue, worn at the edges. My breath hitched. She pushed the box across the table. It slid slowly, smoothly, on the polished wood, stopping inches from my hand. I believe, she said, her voice barely a whisper. This belongs to you. The room went silent. My team exchanged quick, surprised glances. Her lawyer looked utterly blindsided. This was not part of the script. This was not in the acquisition agreement. This was not business. This was something else. I picked up the box. It felt heavier than it should. My fingers fumbled with the clasp. It sprang open. And there it was. The ring. Sitting nestled on the velvet cushion. It glinted under the conference room lights, the same light that illuminated my company logo behind me. It looked exactly as I remembered it. The unique setting, the specific cut, the tiny scratch. It wasn't the cheap replica David had given her. This was the real one. The one he'd sold. The one whose value had somehow, impossibly, found its way back to her. Only for her to return it to me now, in this moment. My hand trembled as I picked it up. It felt cold, foreign. So much history, so much pain, so much struggle, all condensed into this one small object. I looked at Clara. Her eyes were downcast now, fixed on the table. The moment of vulnerability was gone, replaced by a quiet resignation. I knew, with a certainty that pierced the cold satisfaction I had built around myself, that this wasn't an apology. Not truly. Not in the way I had once craved. It was an admission, an acknowledgement of the power dynamic that had irrevocably shifted. She wasn't returning the ring because she suddenly felt remorse for the original betrayal. She was returning it because I had built a world where she had no choice. Because my victory in the business arena had finally reached into the personal, forcing her to confront the consequence of her actions in a way she could no longer avoid. I placed the ring back in the box, closed the lid. The click echoed in the silent room. I didn't say anything about it. There was nothing to say. The transaction, the true transaction, had occurred years ago. This was just the final, physical manifestation of the power I had seized back. The documents require your signature, Clara, I said, my voice steady flat. The brief interruption was over. It was time to finish the business at hand. She nodded, picked up the pen again, and this time, she signed. Each stroke of the pen on the page felt like a final punctuation mark on a painful, complicated chapter of my life. After the signing was complete, there was a brief, awkward exchange of pleasantries. My team was efficient, gathering the signed documents. Clara and her entourage stood, ready to leave. She hesitated by the door, turning back to face me. The velvet box sat on the table between us. "What will you do with it?" she asked, her voice still quiet. I looked at the box. I looked at her, the sister who had been my confidant, my friend, who had stood by and perhaps even benefited from my undoing. The woman who was now relinquishing her life's work to me. "I don't know," I said, truthfully. The victory felt hollower than I expected. The ring, now back in my possession, didn't represent a reclaimed future with David. That future was gone, irrevocably. It didn't even fully represent justice. Justice would have required remorse, understanding, a genuine attempt at reconciliation. This was just settlement, a forced return of stolen goods, facilitated by overwhelming power. She nodded, a ghost of her old smile touching her lips briefly, a smile filled with a sadness I couldn't penetrate, or maybe didn't want to. Then she turned and left, her lawyers following close behind. They were gone, and I was left in the silence of the conference room, the signed papers on the table, my company logo gleaming behind me, and a small blue box holding a ring that held the weight of years of betrayal and struggle. The acquisition made headlines. My company's valuation soared. We integrated Clara's business smoothly, absorbing her employees, her clients, her assets. It was a resounding success, a strategic masterstroke lauded by the industry press. David, I heard he was still around, adrift. The casual help he provided Clara seemed to have been the extent of his post-divorce ambition. He faded into the background, a footnote in the story he helped write. He never reached out about the acquisition or about the ring. His silence was just another layer of absence. The ring box stayed on my desk for a while, then I moved it to a drawer. I didn't wear the ring. It felt tainted, a symbol of loss rather than love or triumph. Sometimes I would take it out, look at it. It was just a piece of metal and stone, but the memories it held were sharp and cutting. The revenge wasn't sweet. It was cold, satisfying on a primal level. Yes, to have turned the tables so completely, to have built a life so far beyond the one they tried to steal from me. But the cost was high. I had lost a husband, a sister, a version of my life I could never get back. I had built a kingdom, but I ruled it alone. The power I had craved, the control I had fought for, it was mine. But it didn't fill the empty spaces the betrayal had created. Slowly, over time, the sharp edges of the memory began to soften. The ring became less a symbol of betrayal and more a reminder of my own resilience, of what I was capable of the strength I found when I had nothing left to lose. It wasn't about the ring itself or the people who had misused it. It was about the journey I had taken, the person I had become, forging myself in the fire of their actions. I still don't know what I'll do with the ring. Maybe one day I'll sell it and donate the money. Maybe I'll keep it as a paperweight. Its significance has changed. It is no longer a promise of a future that never was. It is a relic of a past I survived. And the scar tissue remains, a quiet reminder that even the people closest to you can be strangers, and that sometimes the only person you can truly rely on is yourself. The most powerful negotiation you'll ever win is the one where you reclaim your own worth, piece by painful piece. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.